the city of St. Louis, you're listening to the Don't Push Pause podcast with your hosts, Justin Johnson and Lindsay Reber.
Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome back, Justin.
I'm excited for today's movie. We're doing Lou Adler's Ladies and Gentlemen, The Fabulous Stains.
It was originally called All Washed Up, which I like that title a little bit better.
Honestly, I don't want to kick things off in like a negative light, but I think that's a perfectly great title.
Yeah.
And, this movie didn't do well. And all the things I've read about it, they pretty much blame everything except for the fact that it had a really long title.
No one ever brings it up.
In the early 80s, one-word titles were like, a tight, small title that had the plot of the movie in it.
Safely fit on a marquee.
Ladies and Gentlemen, The Fabulous Stains is like an extremely long and sort of vague title.
Yeah.
But, it is what it is.
And I love this movie. And I think as you and I both being band people, I think we can't help but feel something for this. But if anything, The Stains just feels like a pretty true to life experience as much as you could imagine within a compressed amount of time, in a movie setting.
We've wanted to do like a movie about bands,
mm-hmm.
a band or bands for a while, and I think a lot of the reason is, because like you said, we have both had a lot of experience playing in bands over the years. And I always think about doing it and I'm like, man, there's just so few movies that I feel like really kind of capture the reality of being in the band and like kind of like the often grittiness or like all the turmoil, not like drugs and all this stuff, but just kind of like the, jealousies and rivalries and hardships of like, trying to do something with no money and, organize like a group of people to like work hard. And I feel like this movie captures a little bit of that. I mean, it definitely captures more of like a band that's on the next level who's like touring. It's a multitude of like three different bands, and we'll get into that. But I do think that there's very few movies that kind of capture that. Most of the time, it's the same traditional story of like the first act they're like trying to make it, and then boom, second act they get huge, and then the third act is them like they're downward spiral,
drugs and sex, and everybody hates everybody. Yeah, generally that
nobody
story.
loves us anymore.
The backlash has begun. And not to say that doesn't happen.
They could have been the biggest band in the world.
Exactly. I think that The Stains is a very excellent depiction of a specific time period. It encapsulates like the transition from the 70s to the 80s, that weird, awkward period. Yeah. It really does. And it started off a lot of things. It inspired a lot of future girl bands too, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, I think it's a movie that like definitely sort of like accidentally was ahead of its time.
I don't think it was meaning to do that at all. Even though it did involve some real life punk rockers too.
And there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of things in the movie, and we'll get into it, that are relevant to today's music landscape. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but other things to talk about with the movie, we'll definitely talk about director Lou Adler, writer Nancy Dowd. We'll talk a little bit about the cast. A lot of, non-professional actors. A lot of the cast was made up of real musicians, and then like sandwiched between first timers that went on to do a lot of stuff like Laura Dern and Diane Lane.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot to talk about here. A lot of commentary on the music industry. And one thing I really want to talk about with you is your feelings on the ending of this movie, the last like 2-3 minutes of the movie, and then the big climactic scene leading up to that too. So that's one thing I want to get into later.
Yeah, we'll get into that later. Yeah, because there was a original ending and then a redone ending. alternate ending that ended up being used for the final finished film.
And if you haven't seen this movie, I would really want you to track it down. It's not the cheapest thing to find out there, but if you can find it, maybe piecemeal out there and in clips, it is really worth a viewing, and it's been a delight going back and rewatching it. I didn't discover this movie until way later, like when it was released on DVD. That was the first time I'd ever heard of it.
Yeah, I did not know about this movie till maybe like 4 years ago.
Yeah.
On my Facebook feed, it was a list of like 10 movies that are, like criminally not on Blu-ray or something.
Yeah.
And it was just on there, and I was like, what is this movie? And then I started looking it up and tracked down the DVD of it, and I was like, man, this is awesome.
Yeah.
So
Same with me. X and I tracked it down, and we're like, what is this movie? How have neither one of us, like band people, ever seen this? And then kind of had our minds blown.
We'll get into a lot of Stains talk. Then after that, we'll give you our picks of the week. I kind of stayed with the people in the band movie with 1988's Satisfaction, which was a movie that also had a very early role for Julia Roberts, who went on to do some, a couple big movies.
Yeah, she was in a couple things. I saw her in something.
You didn't go for the band route for your pick of the week.
I did not.
You did kind of a wild card movie.
I did, and I know periodically I, pick a movie that's newer, and not that this movie came out last year or anything, but it was from 2002, and I've always had a little soft spot for Diane Lane, and Unfaithful is my favorite movie of hers, and it would have been a crime to not talk about it. That's one movie that I feel like there's so many layers to it that you could talk about it forever, and I love that movie.
I absolutely love Unfaithful. I'm glad you're doing this movie.
Thanks, man, because I'm pretty happy you're doing Satisfaction.
Yeah. But of course, as always, we'll round things out with our Murray moments. And before we get into our first clip from The Fabulous Stains, Lindsay, can you just give us a quick lowdown, brief summary on what this movie is about?
I would love to. Two recently orphaned teen sisters and their cousin form an all-girl band in the hopes of ditching their no-future town. Together, they talk their way into joining an ongoing tour of aging, kind of has-been, like this metal band, and a fizzling out, but still kind of hot at the time, UK punk band. At first, no one except their Rastafarian tour manager takes them seriously until they use their distinctive look and sound, then the media, to become an overnight sensation. There's a lot that happens in this. If you're in a band or have been in bands, there's no way you're not going to take something out of this movie or not identify with something, but I think it is a fun movie in general to just kind of experience.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think especially if you've played in bands, there's a lot to love here that you'll identify with. We'll go to our first clip from Ladies and Gentlemen, The Fabulous Stains, then we'll come back. We'll get into our first discussion.
Sounds good.
You. Hello? You don't fool me for a minute. I know all about you. You came here tonight thinking you'd see some cute and wonderful rock star. And you hoped maybe he'd take one look at you from up on that stage and he'd fall in love with you just like that. Then your savior could take you out of this dump of a town you live in. You could be different from all the other girls. I bet she's on drugs. Suckers! 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 Be yourselves. These guys laugh at you. They've got such big plans for the world, but they don't include us. So what does that make you? Just another girl lining up to die.
All right.
Now he's the sucker. I'm perfect. But nobody in this shithole gets me, because I don't put out.
So, Ladies and Gentlemen, The Fabulous Stains was directed by Lou Adler, who wasn't someone who had a lot of experience directing films. He was mainly a music producer, worked very extensively in the music industry, but he was also a producer for the comedy albums of Cheech and Chong. And so he got his first directing experience doing the film Up in Smoke, which was a pretty big hit for comedy film standards at the time. And so that kind of put him in lines to direct this film. He also was already kind of like in the film industry with he was the executive producer for Rocky Horror Picture Show, but he was offered 2 scripts, this film that he ended up directing and Airplane, and he had his option of which one he wanted, and he thought the script Airplane was awesome. He was quoted as saying he felt that it was a movie that the writers should direct, and he felt a more connection to the music movie because it was a world that he had come from. And so of course he went with this movie, and Airplane went on to be like a massive success, which just, man,
it's
really
comical. Really, it is, just to think about how insanely popular and big Airplane was compared to this movie.
Yeah, the comparison, because no one knows this film, and like
no one knows
it
this.
didn't even get a DVD release for like 2.5
It wasn't even
decades.
released in theaters.
Yeah.
Like it's completely crazy. And the film's writer was Nancy Dowd, who in the film was credited as Rob Morton. There's a little bit of a story behind that. We'll get to that. But Nancy Dowd is known for writing the movie Slapshot and also the critically acclaimed Oscar-winning movie Coming Home. And so she was pretty well known, or at least at the time, pretty well known. And Carolyn Coon, who wrote for the well-known music magazine Melody Maker, was brought on as a technical supervisor to make this movie look super legit, real punk. She took anyone that wasn't in a real band that was in the Stains movie, the actors, the Stains themselves, were kind of teaching them how to be punk, how to act, what to look like, and really designed the idea for the way that the Stains ended up looking, their hair and style and makeup and everything behind that.
And kind of a wild jump for Nancy Dowd, like going from a very kind of like specific sports comedy, and really kind of like invented that genre of specific style of like how the beats and the story go for a sports movie. Like, I feel like Slapshot was like the structure for like every sports movie that came out like in the 80s, and early 90s, kind of that were like in a comedy way that like sort of like our carbon copy of, Slapshot. And it's because I had seen all these sports movies, so when I watched Slapshot, I was like, oh, this is like all these movies I've seen before, but because I had seen them first, I wasn't as into Slapshot. And
this is the one before that.
Yeah. And Coming Home is an excellent film. I love that movie, but kind of wild to see someone, and it's great, it's awesome. It's a real talent of a writer to be able to jump genres.
Yeah.
And I read that she was friends with the Ramones, and like kind of this script for the Stains was sort of born out of her
seeing like a Ramones show and being inspired by
and her like kind of feeling like the 70s were like dominated, the end of the 70s being dominated like pop music, or like not really like having very much edge. And so she kind of broke down this story into 3 different kinds of bands that are all sort of like merging onto a tour.
And I think that's one of the most obvious things about this movie is the 3 bands that are on this tour bus, how starkly different they are. We've got the aging 70s metal band that are kind of has-beens, and they're the ones that are kind of all washed up, like the movie's original title would indicate. And then you have this contemporary punk band. And when this movie was written and when it came out, this was what was happening at the moment. And if anything, it was almost like punk was fading out a little bit, or like that, UK kind of punk movement was fading out a little bit. I think this was a year after Sid Vicious and the Sex Pistols had died. And so you have the band The Looters, who are representing punk, and then you have the Stains, who are this emerging, what Nancy Dowd and Carolyn Coon thought would be the next, believe that the next jump in music would be girl bands, and would be like this voice that wasn't heard. And I think like the Go-Go's came out in 78, but weren't really gaining traction until MTV much later. But that's what kind of this represents, is like the one fading out, the contemporary, and then how that contemporary is soon going to be the one fading out, and this is going to be the next jump. And there's a lot of commentary in this movie as far as how the music industry works, what we have as far as, I mean, fickleness, I think, is one of the biggest things in this movie, whether it is, you know, the public, the music scene itself, media, fans, kind of all of that is really embodied in this movie.
Yeah, and I think that there's like, if you look at kind of the way music trends over the last like 30 or 40 years, you know, or even if you take it back to like the 40s, you know, like early 40s, mid 40s, like Frank Sinatra, they had like the sock hoppers, you know, and like by the 50s, like that was, you know, Sinatra was like no longer like
Passé.
a hip thing. Yeah. You know, and then like, you know, you have the dawn of like early rock and roll, and by the 70s, you know, it's kind of funny to me because when Lou Adler was talking about what cool music was, he was like referencing like Buddy Holly and these bands from like the late 50s, you know, and it's just like you're talking about stuff that's now already like would seem so old to people that were like in the you know, kids in the 70s like listening to punk music. And there are some truths in the movie too, because you know, the manager's kind of like, once the Stains get hot, he wants, you know, he's already got t-shirts made, and he kind of like is blowing it out, like he knows they're not going to be hot for very long. Like he's seen trends in music. Even the bands are pointing out, like the middle band that's on the tour hates the old guys who had a hit song like 20, you know, or 10 years ago. Yeah. They're making fun of them. And then the Stains, you know, as soon as they get big, they're like, oh, we're past you guys already. And I think this movie kind of shows some of those sides of like the music industry that usually aren't really like put under a microscope in movies.
I think that becomes really obvious when we have the guy from the band in the movie called the Metal Corpses, played by Fee Waybill. He says, you know, if you're not yourself, you're nobody. And like, he's like, yeah, I was like you guys, like you punkers. I went through my phases and I did this and that. But like, when it comes down to it, like, whatever, man, you're like nobody. I've seen all this like stuff before. And
like, I wore leather jackets, like, cause they're, you know,
I have
like,
my glitter phase. And the thing is he might seem like old and crotchety, but like he's not wrong. And the reaction to that is Ray Winstone from the Looters, the lead guy from the punk band the Looters, reacts aggressively and like starts punching him and like sprays a beer in his face. And that's the reaction from the contemporary band. And then you have the Stains that are watching all of this. And I mean, if you think about it, a little bit later on in the movie, Diane Lane, who plays Corinne, Third Degree Burns, she straight up steals a song from the Looters, like intentionally. And, you know, there's a little bit more worked into the story, like what happens around that moment. But I mean, everyone is climbing. Everyone is trying to get to the next point. And the idea of what's going to be the next biggest thing, like the Stains did create their image. They were honest to who they were, and they, as one media personality says in the movie, those girls created themselves. So they weren't put together by something. They did do it. No matter how they did it by themselves.
They, you know, brought in originality, they brought in passion, and sort of like,
and a message.
Yeah. And sort of like this like unbridled, like rebellious youth that, you know, really, I don't think is something that like you can muster if you're not of that age. You know, it is this sort of like early adolescence, sort of like you're just mad at the world. And if you've already had like some things pit against you that early in life, like you're ready for battle. The Stains were definitely like a show of like a band that has something that people were attracted to.
You know, the Stains start out and they're not like the most talented, but they work at it, and they do have a look already, and then they work at it and become better. Like they don't have a drummer, which I kind of like love a little bit. But they do work at it and become a better band. But the whole time they've had a message. And I think that it's crazy how much this was foreshadowing like the Riot Grrrl movement in the early 90s. And there's certainly a feminist undertone to this movie. And that's not to say that the Stains were, you know, the first girl band out there. Certainly not. I mean, we've got the Runaways and the Welders and the Go-Go's were in 78. There were girl bands, but they were not a popular thing. And certainly, I mean, hell, even now, bands that have a girl in them, or God forbid, are all female, are still kind of marginalized or looked at in a different way. But the message behind the Stains, and this is a really big part, is I don't put out. Like, I'm going to dress how I dress, and that is going to be kind of like in see-through, lacy underwear things, and like, you're going to be able to see my body, but you know what? The message is, you can look, but you're not ever going to get this, and don't be a jerk, don't get screwed. I don't put out, and I am who I am. I'm perfect the way I am, and you just don't get me. And I think that in a lot of ways, that was speaking to a lot of women who felt like they didn't have a voice at that time. And no matter what, if you're going to come out with a message like that, it's going to fall on deaf ears with, you know, a particular gender that doesn't necessarily identify with you. Between like a look and a message, the Stains had what they needed to have, and it didn't take very much to make them into an even better band. And I think I like seeing, you know, them become better when they start out kind of, I mean, it is, that first show is real rough, but we've all, I mean, if you've been in a band, you know that first show is always rough.
And the thing is like, the more I watch this movie, the more, and sort of like referencing my own experiences of like playing with bands and like being in the band, the idea of a band having a look may seem very silly, but after you've looked at hundreds, thousands of different band photos and like, you know, advertisements of bands, having a look is a pretty big deal. The group like the Stains were playing, like if I saw that band photo, I'd be like, who's this band? There is something about that, because we are captivated by things that we're unfamiliar with. And when you see something that's unfamiliar, you may have like an adverse reaction, but you have a reaction to it. You know, you have some sort of reaction. There is something, you know, that this movie delivers about a look that is, as far as the entertainment industry is concerned, you know, I think it's like a very important thing. And I'm not saying like, oh, you got to get out and get ripped, or like people have to dress provocatively. That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm just talking about something that's like an interesting look that's like different from what everybody else is doing is what draws people in.
And think about this too from a late 70s 1980 perspective, because that's all you have to go on. Like you have the radio, and you have news, and you have print ads. It's not like we have social media. You don't have that many resources to go on. So you see a band on the news, and the power of the media is a huge part in this movie.
Yeah, and this movie was prophetic in a way that MTV debuted in 1981. This movie was finished already. They had shot it. It took like 2 years before it came out. And the suggestion in this movie, like you said, is like media hyping a band.
Yeah.
And MTV came out, and, you know, you saw these bands that looked cool, and, you know, you heard their music, but you never saw them live.
Yeah, like a lot of times it was like on Saturday Night Live. That's where you saw bands, you know, like on late night programs.
Yeah, and so I guess the sad part of this movie is that it was sort of like showing the dawn of media, television influencing people's view of a band before they have heard an album or like saw them live. But unfortunately, you know, MTV had been on for about a year and exploded, and when this movie came out, it was sort of didn't seem as fresh and new. This movie kind of just looked like a dated like mid-70s movie.
We'll have a little addendum to that MTV influence on this movie in our second discussion. But the power of the media, just to kind of wrap this up real quickly, the power of the media does play a role in this movie, in that if it hadn't been for the Stains making an impact on one particular newscaster and her being influenced by it, despite we see on screen her male counterpart is completely putting down, in like a weirdly passive aggressive way, putting down the band, putting her down, and she is almost kind of empowered in the way that she's talking about it, kind of coming back at him and saying, you know, this band has a message, and and plugging them and being like, if you want to go see them, they're playing tonight at, you know, such and such. Like that's how bands got big, was the radio, was local TV. And, you know, like we said, this movie is of a certain time, and it is a snapshot, and it's certainly not something that you can remake I think, I mean, it doesn't, this world doesn't exist anymore. And coming on the tail end of the punk era that it was, and that dying out, and just so many changeovers. Yeah, the Stains movie is just, I think, really encapsulates a certain time period. It's really cool to watch.
No, yeah, and that's a perfect way to put it. It is very much like a time capsule of late 70s, early 80s convergence of, what was out with the old and in with this new, and that sort of crossover between like people who were 18 and now they're like, in their 20s, and they want to listen to what they've been listening to, and a new crop of people who are turning 17, 18, and they want to hear something new because they're done with the stuff that they listened to as a kid that was probably what their parents were listening to at that time,
Yeah. We've got a lot more to get into. We're going to talk about the influence of this movie, the ending, how it was changed, and we're going to get into a lot more. So let's go to another clip.
Yeah, we'll go to another clip. We'll come back.
Good afternoon. We're the Stains. You guys, what's so tough about getting old? What's so wonderful about getting married? What don't we do? Do you want to be a professional?
It's right.
Yeah, I wanna see the world for free, but I don't like the things you see. Up 2, 3, 4, you in my sky. Call up, calling us again. The commies are coming, did I hear you say? Who knows, maybe I will one day.
She's irritating me now.
She's doing a fucking better job than what you do.
You get out there and do it then.
I don't believe it. You wanker. You must have taught her.
Who knows what you're gonna see? Who knows when your time will be? Join the professionals.
It seems that here in Nowhere Land, it has become clear to several thousand very young women inspired by an unrecorded rock and roll band.
So like we were saying in the beginning, most of the cast was made up of actual musicians of bands from the 70s and early 80s, peppered in with first-time actors, the main actor being Diane Lane, who is the lead singer of the Stains.
I think this was her third movie.
Yeah, makes sense. And I read that she beat out Jodie Foster for the role. Jodie Foster won the role, who had quite a bit of experience.
Yeah.
Tons more experience than Diane Lane, but Diane Lane had that little extra something that...
So I think she looked like she would be in a band more. And even was in Foxes with Laura Dern. That was Laura Dern's first movie. And, I mean, they would have had some chemistry, having worked together before.
I don't think you can go wrong with Jodie Foster, but I think that Diane Lane puts in just such a great performance. And she's had an interesting career because she, did a large batch of movies from ages like 14 to 19 and then retired for a while and wasn't in anything, and then really kind of locked back into these sort of like dramatic adult roles, which I think she's kind of more known for today.
I think so, yeah.
But, she did do quite a few interesting movies.
I remember seeing her in Lonesome Dove, that miniseries.
And Streets of Fire, which is I thought about doing for a pick of the week, but I really am pushing for that to be a feature that we.
Oh, dude, I'm down for that being an episode.
Yeah, I think she, it has a mix of like this like innocence and also like rebelliousness that really comes across. And I think any movie that has like someone who's like 15 acting, most directors will say like you just want to give them as close to their character is in real life, because they they haven't learned to really like do a really get into a character. But I don't know, Diane Lane, that seems like in the opening when they're interviewing her, I feel like there's like layers to her performance in this movie. Like she seems very kind of like burnt out on the world in the opening, and then seems like kind of driven later on. Like in the beginning, she kind of seems like, I don't care about anything. I don't want to work. I don't want to do anything. And then later on, it's like, shit, this is really important to her. Like, she gets like heavily involved in being the leader of her band.
And I think if you were to ask Diane Lane, she'd put herself down and say, I think she does say in the commentary, I'd recast this role. Like I should have played it harder. But really, like you were saying, she starts out a certain way in this movie and is very like headstrong and pushing. And even by the end, when we see that the Stains have, quote unquote, made it, the person that she is then is even different from who she was starting out in the movie. And for a 15-year-old, that's incredibly impressive to have that progression of a character and it be so believable. Like when you see her on stage, not at the final scene of the movie, but where the Stains crowd kind of comes back on them and rebuffs them, how she is not who she was in the beginning of the movie.
I don't know if it's Diane Lane's performance or maybe like the style in which this movie was made, which is kind of like this gritty feel. But this is one of the few movies to me where the lead character is a early teenager, but it doesn't really have like a coming of age movie feel to it.
Yeah, no.
And I don't know if it's because it's set in the world of like music, which is like not something that most, I think, teenagers, like being in the band is not would have been a normal thing. So maybe that's why it doesn't feel like it falls in these coming of age movie tropes. It kind of feels more of like a straightforward, like music drama type movie.
I think going with that, this is a movie about, we're going to get in this band in order to get out of this dump of a town that we live in. There is no coming of age because they've already lived a hard, like rough life at 15, and Diane Lane's character and her bandmate and sister, we're told, have lost their mom, and right in the beginning of the movie we learn that Diane Lane's been fired from her job and she's 15. Like the girl has lived a hard life. She's already an adult, so there is no coming of age. She's just like, I'm getting out of here and I'm going to do something for myself, and I don't care what I got to do to get there.
And the other sort of main actor in this, who also was not a musician, was Ray Winstone, who's the lead singer of the Looters in the movie. And everybody who's in the Looters is in a band in real life, so they rehearsed a little bit, but they were able to kind of get these songs together pretty quick. Tough on Ray Winstone, who wasn't in a band but had to like sing all the lead vocals.
Yeah.
But does a really great job, I think, and kind of has like a really good presence as a band leader. And he's been in a ton of stuff now. I mean, he's been in like 130 movies. He had a pretty memorable scene in The Departed. If you look him up on IMDb, he's like got little parts in a lot of big movies. But I think he does a really great performance in this and plays a scumbag really, really well, because he's just downright unbearable. I mean, I just can't like imagine being in a band with such a stroke of a dude.
Such a stroke of a dude. And not to be outdone, the real band members of the Looters were Paul from The Clash and Paul Cook and Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols. So it's pretty cool. That's your backing band if you're Ray Winstone.
Yeah.
And those guys were a little gun shy about doing this movie too, since it was, Sid Vicious had died, and they're a little bit in the commentary. They were saying that they were like super protective of themselves. And I thought it was really interesting that both Diane Lane and Laura Dern were like, everyone was like, don't do drugs, don't do it, it's going to mess up your life. And just kind of were like good all around people. There wasn't anything bad to be said about them. And saying that too, Laura Dern, 13-year-old, 12 turning 13, she was like 8 feet tall in this movie already.
Yeah.
But is another of the Stains.
And Laura Dern's gone on to huge movies and like
I mean, I don't
multiple David Lynch movies that I love.
So many movies.
And man, the Looters, you know, the music in this movie is really good. I mean, the Looters, I think, put on like a pretty awesome
I would listen.
set.
I would buy that album.
But they put on a pretty great set, you know, even though they're getting booed by the Stains fans.
Yeah, I'd buy a Looters album. I don't know if I would buy a Metal Corpses album.
I definitely would not.
But it was like we said before, Fee Waybill and Vince Welnick from the band The Tubes. So it was pretty cool that actual bands were involved with this movie, and funny too that a movie's top billed people are going to be guys from bands rather than like your main stars. I mean, you have Peter Donat, who, I mean, until his passing, like he was a very well-known actor in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But for the most part, you know, like it wasn't, Diane Lane was top billed in this movie, and a 15-year-old top billed, that's saying something.
Saying you don't have a whole lot. A lot of star power to
That's saying, come see this movie if you like the Sex Pistols.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, all around, you know, it's a little rough around the edges at times, but I think overall, like the performances are really good. And I also want to make mention of Barry Ford, who is a musician himself, and he really is, I think, the only movie where he's actually acted in. And
he worked on the songs in this movie too.
Yeah, he all the kind of Rasta songs that you hear that are playing, those are his songs. And he plays the tour manager, Lawn Boy, who, you know, has like several scenes. And I think Lou Adler was saying in the commentary about how, like, you know, his performances, he did great when they did rehearsals, but he said the big thing that stopped him from doing a good performance is when they would yell action, he would just get really like kind of clammed up. And he's the kind of person that brings, I think, like the middle ground. Like he's like trying to keep everybody together. I think like a good, you know, tour manager is like, you know, trying to not take sides and like see everybody's point of view, but then you also see he's got his own personal strife that he's dealing with that comes into play in the story. And I don't know, I think he was like a really good character I think it was like really needed, so you just didn't have sort of like these bands nipping at each other through the whole movie. Yeah,
if anything, he feels like the backbone. He feels like the backbone that links all of these ribs, these bands together, and keeps them from killing each other. And with that said, when they're on the bus and just kind of like background scenes, we have like this Rastafari music playing in the background. And in a rock and roll movie, it could feel out of place, but for some reason it does not. If anything, it's comforting.
And it kind of, I think it breaks up like this sort of not this being like a straightforward, like it's just like a straight up punk rock movie, you know? And it's interesting because I think this movie is viewed as like part of the punk rock lexicon of like movies that came out in Hollywood.
It still felt really honest. It didn't feel like it was trying to be anything. And I do really attribute that to Nancy Dowd's feeling behind it and inspiration behind it. Carolyn Coon's like bringing everything that she did to make this look authentic, and Lou Adler having the background of the music industry behind him. I feel like with all of these voices, no matter if they were fighting or disagreeing on where this movie should end up, I think all of that made this movie have a very real vibe behind it.
Yeah, I think if anything, this movie comes off wildly authentic. And this movie, I was going to ask you this, you know, I don't think this is a first time watch movie. And what I mean by that to our listeners is like movies where like, I feel like it takes more than one watch to really like the movie. And I know that sounds ridiculous, you know, because it sounds like, what was wrong with the movie? You didn't like the first time, I'm going to watch it 2 times or 3 times, and I'm going to start liking it more. But I do, it's a movie I appreciate more with multiple views, because I think I like see the performances more, and it comes off like a very simple movie, but I feel like there's like a lot of little moments in it that add up. And there is this sort of like feeling of like destitute and like longing to belong that I didn't really get the first time I saw it. And I think like the third time I watched it before we did this episode, it's Christine Lahti plays because the band The Stains is made up of
two sisters and
a cousin, and so the cousin is portrayed by Laura Dern, and her mom is portrayed by Christine Lahti. And before they take off to go on tour, they're sort of staying with the Christine Lahti character, and she gets interviewed once the Stains take off and they become kind of a sensation. She's interviewed about them, and at first she comes up, the first time I kind of, I was into the movie and I wasn't really like focused in on her interview so much as being so much substance. But like the third time I watched it, like when she's talking about her daughter and how, she feels like everything that her parents, like how they didn't believe in her and they didn't think that she could have a purpose or was worth anything, how she kind of like transferred that over to raising her daughter, and how she's like, now that she's seen all these people responding to her, even though she might not understand being in a band or what that means or what it means to be able to be a part of something that's creative. She wishes that her Diane Lane's mom was still alive so she could see that all these people reacting to their band in a positive way and in an influential way. And man, that really kind of like broke me up. The last time I watched it, I was like, God, this is a real powerful scene,
Yeah, she only has 2 scenes in the movie, and they're lengthy scenes, but she's set up in the beginning as kind of trailer trashy, like how to not be a mom in the first scene, and then the next one is the one that you were describing. Her saying, "I'm glad that my daughter was able to overcome me putting her down as just like my parents did to me." Like that, like who says that? You don't expect someone to say that in real life, let alone on television. It's just kind of incredible.
And what I love that the movie does is that Laura Dern reacts to it in sort of a somewhat emotional way. She's like, first she's like embarrassed that they're interviewing her mom, and then she's like kind of listening to what her mom has to say.
Stoic and like, I can't believe she's saying this, but
what I like about what this movie does, and it does it in multiple times throughout, is that it could go the route of like going into like a sappiness of like the reuniting with Laura Dern and her mom, or like there's no scenes like that. That's not what's important. They're not trying to like make amends and wrap everything up super neat and nicely and have everything connect. And you don't get that scene. So it's like this nice little moment. And then we go back into the world of like them trying to like figure out what to do with their band. And I love that about this movie. I feel like it kind of is like going against the grain of what I think a movie would do now. If they had that scene, we'd definitely see like the reunion scene of them, like we love each other now, and they would embrace, but you get none of that in this punk rock.
It's so rock and roll to do it like that.
Yeah.
And another total rock and roll thing is the writer Nancy Dowd leaving the production and removing her name from the credits and going by Rob Morton in the credits that you see in the movie because of disagreements with Lou Adler. And this goes with Carolyn Coon, too. She felt pretty put off by the whole experience as well. I mean, not the entire thing, but Nancy Dowd experienced some sexual harassment on the set. There was a cameraman that like grabbed her breast at one point, and she just on top of feeling disrespected by Lou Adler over the script, that was kind of just like the tipping point. But Carolyn Coon said that the original ending, which we'll get to in a second, she felt was completely muted by Lou Adler, and that he was, and I don't know if she means literally or not, but she said he was just tearing pages out of the script, and she just felt like Adler really just took a hacksaw a little bit to this original script, and Nancy Dowd and Carolyn Coon just had enough of it and left the production.
And I think it can always be probably a difficult thing on sets where, because some movies, you have the script is written and then a director is hired and, changes get made, whether it's the actors like improvising or, rewriting, or something is changed because of troubleshooting, from location or whatever. They got to condense a scene or like move something around to make it easier to shoot. But when a writer's physically there, you invite the writer onto the set, and they're, this is a very specific script to like fit with like a music genre, and the writer's there with the actors on set every day. That can be a different situation, where, you start changing stuff and ripping pages out of a script. Yeah, you're gonna have a creative difference, you're gonna butt heads. And I can only imagine how difficult that would be to have somebody, take what you're doing. And it's to take what you're doing, because it's like Lou Adler didn't come from a directing background or a theater background, like he had,
or a female perspective background.
Exactly, and so he's just sort of like, yeah, we're just gonna do this. I'm certain that was probably like blood boiling.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And that leads us to the ending sequence to this movie. And at this point, when we get to the big show that the Stains are playing, they're finally headliners. They've replaced the Looters as the headlining band on the tour. The Looters are now supporting them. And it's almost as if they have fell for their own gimmick in some ways. But there's not really enough information there to make you feel like, oh, the Stains are just posers now. Like they're a shell of what they once were. But in the end, at this show, the Looters open, and all of the Stains fans, I mean, they're there just to see the Stains, and they're just flipping off the Looters, and they stop in the middle of a song, and Billy Ray Winstone reads everybody the riot act and says, you all have been had. You all are just a walking advertisement. You've bought into this hair dye, this fashion, this everything that the Stains have been giving you. You're nothing but a commercial. And in the end, it sucks, but it's like a man that makes the Stains fans rebel against them. And it's a really awful, awful scene to watch. I cannot imagine being a band, experiencing something like that, let alone the actors, and probably how long that took of getting shit thrown at you on stage and hair dye thrown at you. It is a scene that I feel like is a little bit over the top. I don't really feel like that would actually happen, but for the purposes of movie making, that is the point that's needing to come across.
It's like an exaggeration
Yes.
of like how a crowd
Yeah.
or how fandom can like change so quickly.
Going back to that fickleness.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is something, whether it happens, immediately on the turn of a dime at a show, or that happens with, your friend's band that I used to go see them all the time, and then they signed with that record label, and now they're all like cool and like, whatever, they sold out. Like that happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, whether we see it manifested in the Stains movie like this, or it happens like in real life, it does happen.
And I can understand like it does come off a little melodramatic in the movie, but I think I can understand like accelerating that so you don't spend like 20 minutes on because their rise to fame and their descent is so quick in the movie. As it stands, it was a very kind of like melancholy ending. They ended as soon as quick as they began, like their popularity. And I want to say like they screened the ending for like just one showing, and the crowd hated it.
Well, the ending after the terrible show that they have, it's still kind of tried to be a little inspirational, with Corinne, Diane Lane, going on the news program that we've been seeing throughout the whole movie, and her still being like, I think every 16-year-old needs to be, on their birthday, needs to be given an electric guitar. Like, it's still trying to be inspirational. She still rebuffs Ray Winstone's character that's saying, come with me and be my groupie, be my guitar tech or whatever. And she still puts that off. But then, as the original ending of the movie was supposed to be, these girls go by her on a scooter. One of them's got a guitar on her, and they're listening to a Stains song. And she like throws her head back as if like, ugh. Man, I mean, at least there's something. It's kind of inspirational.
Yeah, and I think it's a perfectly great ending.
Totally.
Maybe not melancholy, but like the ends on not the highest note. It's not a Hollywood ending by any means.
It is certainly melancholy, but it's kind of like that, what if this hadn't happened? But as the release of the Stains movie exists as it does, the actual ending to the movie was filmed like a year and a half, 2 years later. And it is after the birth of MTV, and the Stains have made it onto MTV, and we see them looking a little bit older, and they're very much emulating like go-go style, that sort of thing. And it's not that it's bad.
No, not at all. And it's not a terrible ending by any means, but it seems like kind of unnecessary. And it also kind of, I feel like in some ways, it defeats the purpose of what they built up, because their style is completely different in the MTV video that they do at the end. And it looks like they've changed their style because they're older. In actuality, a few years older, but I think that was sort of the point of it's showing their success. But they're also singing the Looters song, Join the Professionals, which is the oddest thing to me, because it's like, wait, so they're still using the Looters song as their hit song.
Why aren't they using the song that they came out with?
Yeah. Like, so that was the only thing to me that was like kind of like odd for the ending. Tonally, it would have made more sense to go with the original ending, like you said, of them sort of inspired at the end, but not doing this sort of, oh, now they're big and famous, and we're just going to watch a 3-minute video of them doing this song like an MTV video, and then it just ends. Yeah. But I don't think it's a terrible ending, but I would have stuck with the original, but I'm sure that they were trying to fight tooth and nail just to
get the movie
to make it a success, because early reactions were not kind to the movie, and still that new ending didn't seem to help. This movie kind of got buried.
Paramount didn't even have a release for it because of those crappy reviews that it got at screenings. And really, if it weren't for the late night USA program Night Flight, if you remember that, if you were ever had some insomnia watching some late night weirdo movies, Ladies and Gentlemen, The Fabulous Stains was one of those. It wasn't like in high rotation or anything like that, but that is where so many people saw this movie and taped it, bootlegged it, gave it to their friends, and steadily and very, very slowly this movie has developed a cult following. And a lot of people from riot girl bands like Bratmobile and Bikini Kill, Kristen Hirsch, even John Bon Jovi, even Courtney Love. People have been influenced by this movie, and it is really crazy. As a fan of riot girl music myself, it is nutty to see this movie that was filmed in 1980 and see stuff from the early 90s that you're like, wow, I can't believe this is predating this. But it really is incredible, and it is really cool that this movie influenced so many actual, real, awesome bands to come after it.
Yeah, I think that says something to the testament of its originality and its dedication to like kind of like get behind what it is to be in a band and the music scene of that era. Yeah. Well, we'll come back for some final thoughts on The Fabulous Stains, but we got to keep moving on. We'll get to our picks of the week. I, again, kept it on the band front with Satisfaction, but you chose to go a different route. You stuck with Diane Lane for a movie that I truly love, and that's Unfaithful. What can you tell me about Unfaithful?
Oh, Unfaithful. There's a quote from Unfaithful that always sticks out to me, and that is, there's no such thing as a mistake. There's what you do and what you don't do. It's easy to get wrapped up in the first hour of this movie. It's sensual and intoxicating. It's also a total study in human behavior, one that feels uncomfortably honest. And as the title of the film indicates, this is a story about an affair. It's about the absolute engulfing feeling one can have from an enthralling affair with an unexpected someone, and the guilt that can accompany such a thing, and the unspoken secretive language between partners, rendering it impossible to fully hide any secrets of this nature. Diane Lane, the fabulous Stain herself, absolutely embodies this role as the cheating wife. And I'd venture to say, if you know this movie, you remember a scene of her heading home on a train while thinking about her first lustful tryst with her Frenchman she barely knows, played by Olivier Martinez. Cutting between her flashing back to the encounter and her physical reaction while thinking about it on the train back home, man, it is powerful and really shows the strength of her acting in just this one scene. Between her like coy grins and half sobs, is she laughing or crying? I don't know. I don't even think she knows. But Lane's character of Connie toggles between feeling liberated yet stunned at what she's just done. Director Adrian Lyne, most notably of Fatal Attraction, which we discussed at length in episode 4, juxtaposes moments like this with a more unfortunate occurrence that happens later in the film after Connie's affair is revealed to her husband. The first half of this movie is certainly squirm-worthy, meaning if you're uncomfortable with rising sexual tension, be ready to feel something. As she does everything but rebuff her inner feelings towards the Frenchman, Paul, Connie feels awakened from her suburban coma. Sure, she loves her family, but her marriage is painfully vanilla. Girl is repressed. And although reluctant and full of guilt, she's very open to being ravaged by this handsome stranger. Unfaithful is a movie divided into two parts. There's Connie's story, and then her husband, Edward, played by Richard Gere, who finds out about the affair. Lane is such a master at exploring emotional conflict stemming out of sexual exploits. We quite literally see when the story turns its focus to Edward. As the audience, we've been seduced into understanding why Connie continues this affair, even though she's neglecting her normal responsibilities as a mom, let's say. And right as we're cringing at being understanding of that situation, it's revealed that Edward has tracked down Paul's apartment, but not before Connie coincidentally dashes out without Edward seeing her and leaving him to confront Paul about the affair without running into his cheating wife. Now, when you describe this movie to someone and say, well, Edward accidentally ends up murdering Paul, it could feel a little trite, but this movie isn't just that simple. It's about guilt, primal urges, and being unable to control yourself. As Lane so skillfully and passionately depicts Connie shedding herself of her marital constraints, he does the same with Edward's flash of passionate rage towards Paul, then his desperation in attempting to clean up his crime. There is one thing that makes me kind of laugh throughout Unfaithful, and that is how comically inept both Connie and Edward are at hiding their misdeeds. Connie's terrible at lying and too caught up in the affair to really care, and Edward is such a dummy in almost every respect in cleaning up Paul's murder. Like, if you've seen any episode of Forensic Files, you'd be like, oh, honey, you real bad at this. You're going to get caught. Affairs aren't a new concept in movies, and Unfaithful is a remake of a 1969 French film called The Unfaithful Wife. The strengths of this film rely so heavily on physical, gripping passion and the emotions that get stirred in, rather than the murder being the central focus of the film. Paul's murder is a result of passion, just as the affair is a result of uncontrollable passion. This is a study of human nature, and I've seen so much Dateline in my life that I know the story is not that far-fetched. Lane went to his 9.5-week cinematographer for this movie, and if you're familiar with the intensity of that highly erotic drama, then you know what Lane was thinking. Lighting, tone, smoke-filled backdrops, frequent dampness, all these aspects only furthered Lane's emotionally gripping vision with every single scene where fingers are digging into bodies. I also appreciate seeing the passage of time, how Lane does this in this movie. Like, you know how long the affair has been going on because you see how Connie's wounds that she sustained the day that she met Paul, you see them like slowly healing. That's kind of like a cool thing to look for. It's the little things like this that make Unfaithful such a visual and visceral treat to endure. The ending is kind of very open-ended, and there isn't much of an overly preachy message, which I appreciate on both counts. And Richard Gere makes you feel shattered and heartbroken, even angry for him, but you also can't really villainize Lane's character. There's an understanding of how Edward temporarily lost control, and even before Paul is murdered, we felt nauseatingly concerned that this wasn't going to end up well for Connie. Lane's performance is a sucker punch to the gut. No wonder she was nominated for a Golden Globe and an Oscar for this movie. It's all about desperation, self-inflicted torment, guilt, and lust, all things that almost every person can empathize with at some moment in life, I'm sure. Unfaithful is certainly a very adult look at the deepest emotions of the heart. And like I said, the subject of cheating isn't exactly reinventing the wheel, but the way in which you explore the topic does matter. And Lane's ability to expound upon the subject, combined with impassioned performances, Unfaithful is just really a movie that just sticks with you. I'm really glad that you like this movie, Justin.
Yeah, I don't know that there's another movie to me about infidelity that is as raw as this one, that also makes you kind of feel really like kind of like bad for like everybody
Everyone.
in the movie, but like not, but like in a way of like you sympathize with everybody in the movie, and you kind of see it from everybody's angle. And I think that's really difficult to do. And this movie really pulls it off, I think, and a lot of that has to do with all the performances, but and really like a movie that I can kind of like put on anytime and watch, even though it's really dark.
Yeah, the first time I saw this movie, I had like a weird like fever coldness, and I was just on my couch for 2 or 3 days straight. And my memory of it is Unfaithful was like on a loop on TNT or TBS like 24 hours or something. That's like what my fever dreams imagined. And I feel like I saw this movie over and over and over and over again, and I kept waking up to it and being like, this is really like putting me in a crazy headspace, but I couldn't stop watching it. Like, how do you watch a movie and you don't villainize a murderer or someone that's cheating on their partner? It's just really... It's really amazing.
Yeah, well, and I think the how you mentioned the bumbliness of the Diane Lane and Richard Gere, it's like, but to me that makes their characters like you sympathize for them more, because if they were like, oh, you know, immediately they know how to clean up a murder site, you know, it's like they think of all the angles, but it's like to them they're just like, this is so far outside of their reality. It makes you kind of feel for them even more, because you know they're just like in a way and over their heads, and you feel that tension.
They have no idea what they're doing.
Such a I mean, just an amazing movie.
I'm so glad you like it.
What a great pick.
I can't wait to hear about Satisfaction.
Well, I'll tell you, Satisfaction is quite the opposite of Unfaithful.
It is.
And it's quite the opposite of The Fabulous Stains, though it is a movie about a rock band from Baltimore called The Mystery. The movie was produced by Aaron Spelling, who did some pretty huge television work, namely 90210. But this movie was an NBC production, and Family Ties was a big hit for NBC at the time. And so they were trying to build like a launching pad for Justine Bateman's career. She was one of the main stars of Family Ties. Most importantly, we got the name of our dog Mallory from Mallory and Family Ties.
My God, I didn't know that.
But the movie is very, it's a very kind of saccharine setup. You know, it's like a band from Baltimore who wants to go to, of all places, travel all the way to West Palms, Florida to audition for a gig to be the house band for this kind of like country club setting. If you sit down on a Sunday and watch this movie and keep your expectations low, it's a very fun movie. And I don't mean that to bash the movie, but I mean, there's not a whole lot, you know, there's like 30 minutes of a movie, and then the rest is sort of like them going to a beach and like everybody kind of falls in love with somebody, you know what I mean? So it is a very like fluff type movie. The music's like kind of like this sort of like generic rock of the late 80s. But having said that, you know, we've got a very early performance by Liam Neeson, a very early performance by Julia Roberts, both of which I think like kind of show early on that they had like, you know, a genuine feel of like dramatics and you know, that alone is interesting enough to like sit down and watch the movie to see the start of their careers. But Justine Bateman, I think, really gives a good performance. I mean, maybe not the best musical performance. So she did, I'll give her credit. You know, she went and rehearsed and, you know, learned guitar and does the vocals herself. They didn't, you know, she's not lip singing. You know, overall, it's a fun movie to sit down and watch again on like a Sunday afternoon, Saturday afternoon. And one other thing I'd note is Britta Phillips, who plays a guitar player in the movie. This is the opposite of the Stains. Like most of the people in this movie were actors, but Britta Phillips was one of the few that was a musician and did have some experience. She started off as being as the main voice of the cartoon from Gem and the Holograms, and has gone on to have like a pretty big career in composing and writing music. But she, I think, gives a good performance in this, but also sings lead on Mr. Big Stuff, which is one of the, I think, better performances of music and the band playing in the film. Yeah, overall, a fun movie to check out, and a good pairing, I think, with The Fabulous Stains.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Very good, well-intentioned pairing.
I hope it didn't come off like I was like bashing the movie, but I was just kind of like, you know, I would be remiss to not point out the sort of silliness of the movie, but I think it's in a good way.
I think there, in a lot of ways, there were a lot of movies in the 80s that had a farcical feeling to them that weren't really based in reality, but it was like this idea of like a fantasy reality based, you know, in something that you could actually achieve. And yeah, Satisfaction's one of those. It is a perfect Sunday afternoon movie.
It's a fun movie.
They look pretty cool as a band.
Yeah, they do look cool. Yeah. Well, so those are picks of the week, Satisfaction and Unfaithful. Unfaithful, pretty easy to come by. Satisfaction, I couldn't really find any place that was streaming it. Actually, the DVD was actually like not real cheap to find either, so I ended up getting like a fairly inexpensive Laserdisc off eBay, and that's how I watched my copies.
On Laserdisc.
Pretty, yeah.
It's legit, right?
Which
there.
is not like a very viable option for most people probably in 2020. But
you can find this on Laserdisc.
Oh yeah, you guys aren't watching Laserdisc out there. I celebrate all the mediums.
You do love your Blu-ray.
Yeah, I do love my Blu-ray, and this isn't available on Blu-ray. So
do you have a beta player?
I don't.
Okay.
No,
We'll have to change that.
I'm not crazy. Betamax.
I only watch Betamax.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Well, let's keep moving forward. We'll come back for some final thoughts on the Fabulous Stains, but here's your Murray moment.
Chicks dig me because I rarely wear underwear, and when I do, it's usually something unusual.
I think I need a root canal. I'm sure I need a long, slow root canal.
You gonna come and shake my monkey tree again?
Oh, what does that old queen know? She didn't even show.
Hey, this is so scrumptious. Is this hand shucked?
The flowing robes, the grace, all striking.
That was fun.
As I've said before, linking Billy Murray to something music-related isn't too hard, but it's the honing in on a particularity that makes each one so special. And in the spirit of the Stains, if we're talking about linking him to a female musician, there's a few out there that come to mind, but maybe none more prominent than former actor turned super successful musician Jenny Lewis. A few years ago, you may remember there was a big rumor that she and Billy were dating. Even if you hadn't heard that rumor, just know that it was all the talk of the indie rock community at the time. So let's try to straighten out this story. Their rumored relationship blew up the internet thanks to speculation stemming from a premiere party from Billy's movie Rock the Casbah in 2015. A photo of the two singing on stage together and Jenny being referred to as Billy's, quote, special lady friend by an unnamed source was all the celebrity rumor mill needed. The rumors were furthered by Jenny being one of the last after-party attendees to leave, and a source claiming that she was Bill's, quote, current younger love interest. As if things couldn't be fueled enough by that, they were spotted at another screening together at an inn in the Hamptons. Once one source got this, it got passed around the internet faster than bleach at a Stains show. The truth is, though, Billy and Jenny had been friends for quite some time before this internet frenzy in 2015. Not only have they gone to basketball games together, Billy's been to Jenny's shows numerous times, both her current band and with her previous one, Rilo Kiley. After the rumors began, Jenny was also in Netflix's A Very Merry Christmas, and earlier in 2015, the pair even did the 20th anniversary of the Poets House Walk across Brooklyn Bridge, which is a charity event that Billy's done a few times. But where exactly did their friendship begin? The answer is the Austin City Limits Music Festival in 2008. Jenny was playing with Rilo Kiley in the middle of covering Love Hurts, and then she notices Bill right there on her side of the stage. And admittedly, a total distraction, but girl made it through, and it was only natural that some kind of introduction was going to happen after that. She and the band took Billy back to their tour bus, where he asked Jenny for water and a beer. He then took his hat off, poured the water into his hat, and then put the hat back on his head. Jenny knew right at that moment that they were going to be friends for a long time. The two hung pretty tight for the rest of the night, but that's not where the story ends. Jenny's band had a post-show plan. Everyone take mushrooms and watch the first presidential debate between Barack Obama and John McCain. Jenny wasn't really feeling like doing mushrooms too much that night, so in an unexpected turn of events, she soon found herself in a golf cart with Bill Murray, traveling across the music festival grounds. Apparently, his plan involved tracking down food for the entire band. So together, Jenny and Bill came across a food stand selling barbecue sandwiches, and Billy bought every last sandwich that they had. They carted it on back to the tour bus and descended upon the band with a massive amount of food. I can't even imagine, the surreal experience of that, being at this massive music festival that you just played and having your band leader, accompanied by Bill Murray, personally deliver you more sandwiches than you could ever imagine. And you're on hallucinogens. Just like, wow. The crew watched the debates together, and as time rolled on, according to Jenny, Bill just kind of disappeared into the night. This was only the first time Billy and Jenny had hung out, and I can imagine after a magical experience like this how, every time you run into each other, you embrace and seem thick as thieves, to the point that people speculate you're romantically involved. Jenny's camp has always denied the rumors of their relationship, especially since she'd been dating her guitarist for forever at the time the rumors began. And Billy's always going to be dodgy whenever asked about who he's dating, Jenny or whomever, at any point in his life when he hasn't been married. But it doesn't make their relationship any less special. At the end of the day, I don't know. Who really cares? They have a pretty chill, respectful friendship, no matter what anyone wants to label it. And honestly, I kind of like the mystery, too. I'm sure you know about this rumor, Justin.
I've never heard this rumor, and
You've never heard that rumor?
I've never heard that
what?
rumor.
That they were dating?
No, not
Whoa,
at all. And I'm
okay.
like real into Jenny Lewis too. I've never heard that rumor.
Oh, yeah.
But man, I've listened to you, tell about 50 or so of these Murray moments, and I've never felt like jealousy when listening to one of them until this particular one, because there's like a multitude of jealousies. It's just like, what would be more fun is riding around with Jenny Lewis in the golf cart after Austin City Limits, or being opposite Bill Murray, or just being on mushrooms with your band, and then Bill Murray and your band leader comes back with a bunch of barbecue sandwiches. Man, that's pretty wild. But
I know.
No, never heard that rumor.
It was. I definitely remember when that came out, and when a Very Merry Christmas came out, there was even more speculation because it was after that had even started. But man, that story continues to crack me up, and it just makes sense that after you do something kind of wacky like that with someone, you're always going to be like, "Yo,
yeah,
we got that special time."
Well, thanks for that Murray moment.
Of course.
Well,
we're about ready to wrap it up.
Yeah, we got to wrap it up. But do we have any final thoughts on the Fabulous Stains before we call this episode quits?
Oh man. One real quick tidbit. There's a scene where Fee Waybill of the Metal Corpses is supposed to be buying cocaine from someone. And of course you're not going to be doing real cocaine in a movie, but I guess as a prank, as a real funny joke, someone replaced the fake stuff with actual cocaine. So that scene, there's like 5 different takes, Waybill said, of them doing that, and it is actually real cocaine that they're doing in that scene. So I think that that's pretty entertaining and also incredibly unfortunate because you're not expecting that.
Yeah, really kind of speaking, I guess my only final thought would be kind of going off of what you were saying with that scene, the coke scene. That's really outside of like one other little scene, the only scene of drug use in the movie, which I feel is like drugs sometimes, granted, I think that goes hand in hand with like rock and roll movies and stuff, but sometimes I feel like the drug and sex is like almost like monopolizes a lot of movies about bands. And I feel, I don't know, not to sound like super square, but it almost like I feel like I like this movie how it's not so focused on like the drug habits of all the band members. Like it just, there's a couple scenes there, it's around, but it's more focusing on the relationships and them like playing their music. But I appreciate that about the movie.
Yeah, that is a really good point I hadn't thought of. There aren't too many. There is like one overdose scene, and
yeah, actually, now that I think about it, I forgot that somebody does die of a drug overdose.
But for the most part,
20% of the movie drug use. The rest of it, 80% drug free.
80 dare.
Maybe that death makes up for like 30%, maybe 70-30.
For the most part, there's not that much. Drugs are not part of this movie. That's not to say that, there weren't some people that were on drugs.
Yeah.
Actors in the movie. But, different time.
Now I wish I was on drugs.
I am on drugs, Justin.
Well, we should wrap it up there. Hope you enjoyed our discussion on Ladies and Gentlemen, The Fabulous Stains. Lindsay, what do we have coming up? next episode?
Next episode, we have a real fun one I haven't revisited in a few years, but I do recall loving it very much, and that is Better Off Dead.
Better Off Dead. Such a weird, wacky movie.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to
me too.
getting into that one. Well, we'll have that up next time. Thank you again for listening. If you want to hit up old episodes, you can check out our website, don'tpushpausepodcast.com. We've got an archive there of everything that we've put together over the last year or so. Please do follow us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, Don't Push Pause Podcast. If you want to reach us directly for any question whatsoever, you can contact us at don'tpushpausepodcast@gmail.com. If you're listening to us on Apple Music, please rate and review us. We'd appreciate it. It helps us out quite a bit, helps us show our growth. And if you are streaming us and not downloading, please give us a download. Please subscribe. Until next time, I'm Justin Johnson.
And I'm Lindsay Reber.
Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you.